All right, so today we're diving into something really crucial, especially for India and anyone following those UPSC mains, current affairs, natural
Yeah.
farming. It's getting a lot of attention, and for good reason. I think we
Yeah.
all know the Green Revolution. It's like, well, it gave us food security, but then it also led to, soil degradation, costs going up for smaller farmers.
Right. Yeah.
And now this alternative is emerging, right? This idea of natural farming.
Mm.
Even the Indian government's gotten on board with this national mission on natural farming.
Yeah, it's a big
So
deal.
that's what we're focusing on today. Natural farming in India, kind of unpacking it all.
Absolutely. And we've got a great sauce for this deep dive, a really detailed article from the Hindu.
Perfect, yeah.
Especially for those prepping for UPSC. Think of this as our, focused discussion on this really key topic in Indian agriculture. Could even pop up in prelims too.
Right, makes
So,
sense.
yeah.
Okay, so natural farming, it's more than just like no chemicals, right? What's the big idea?
Yeah, you hit it. It's definitely more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
And at its core, natural farming is all about cultivating food, but doing it in a way that actually works with natural processes, not against them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about building up healthy soil, having resilient crops, and doing that by tapping into locally available resources,
Okay.
almost like mimicking how nature does things,
Yeah.
The Hindu article we're looking at, it breaks down several key aspects.
Okay.
And like you mentioned, the most basic one, no chemical inputs.
Right.
So no synthetic fertilizers, no pesticides. Those are out. That's
Gone.
gone.
Uh-huh.
And then it gets interesting because you have these bio inputs they talk about. Things like jiva root, beji root, panchagavya.
Yeah, those were some new terms for me, I'll admit.
Well, they're basically traditional preparations, all natural, that really enrich the soil.
Okay.
And they help protect those seeds too.
It's interesting.
So jiva root, for instance, it's like this liquid fertilizer, totally organic, made from cow dung, cow urine, jaggery, some flour, and water.
Okay.
It's almost like a super concentrated dose of good microorganisms.
Oh, okay.
And those microbes, they're essential, right? They break down organic matter. They make sure those plants can actually use the nutrients.
Gotcha.
Then you've got beji root, similar idea, but it's specifically for treating seeds, protects them from diseases that could be lurking in the soil.
Smart, right from the get-go.
Exactly, right at the start.
Yeah.
And then panchagavya, this is another powerful one. It comes from, 5 different cow products, as the name suggests.
Yeah, makes sense.
Known for, really boosting plant growth and immunity.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, these bio-inputs, they're like the foundation of natural farming, providing nutrition, making that soil healthy.
Okay, so instead of relying on those, big factory-made fertilizers, it's about using what's naturally there on the farm, right? These natural boosters.
Exactly, working with nature.
Yeah.
So beyond the no chemicals and these bio-inputs, there are a few other key principles that really define natural farming.
Okay, lay them on me.
Well, minimal soil disturbance is a big one.
Okay.
In conventional farming, there's a lot of plowing and tilling.
Right, yeah.
But that can mess with the soil structure. It can actually harm those microorganisms that are living there and doing good work.
I never really thought about that, all those little guys in there.
Yeah, they're essential. Even things like mycorrhizal fungi, they form these networks that help plants get nutrients, and tilling can disrupt that.
Wow.
So natural farming tries to avoid that.
Leave it alone, let it do its thing.
Preserve that natural architecture of the soil.
Okay, cool.
Then you've got intercropping and crop rotation.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
These are pretty clever ways to naturally boost soil fertility and keep pests under control. Basically, you're growing different crops together in the same space, or you're switching them out in a planned sequence.
Yeah, like mix it up a bit.
Exactly. Keeps things balanced. And finally, mulching, which is like putting a blanket of organic material on top of the soil.
Right.
And cover crops, which are plants you grow specifically to protect and nourish the soil.
Okay.
These are vital for holding on to moisture, stopping erosion, and naturally suppressing weeds without needing those herbicides.
So it's really like a whole system, right?
It really is a very holistic approach.
Holistic, yeah, that's the word for it.
Thinking about the whole picture.
Okay, so for anyone listening, especially those of you tracking this for UPSC prep, today we're going deep into natural farming, but specifically in the Indian context.
Right.
We want to get not just the what's, but also the why.
Yeah.
Like, what potential does this hold for India? What are the real hurdles on the ground?
Exactly, getting into the nitty-gritty.
Nitty-gritty. Okay, so let's start with the potential benefits for India, and I think soil health is a good place to begin, right?
Absolutely, that's a major one.
Yeah.
And what's really insightful here is how natural farming directly tackles this problem of land degradation in India. The Hindu article, it highlights this alarming statistic. 30% of India's land is already degraded.
That's a lot, yeah.
It's huge, and the consequences are far-reaching. It impacts our agricultural productivity, food security.
Right.
We're losing fertile topsoil. The land's ability to hold water decreases.
It's like the foundation is weakening.
Exactly. And natural farming, by cutting out those synthetic fertilizers and pesticides completely, it actually allows that natural microbial life in the soil to come back, to thrive.
So those little guys get to do their thing.
Exactly. And when they do, soil structure improves, there's better air circulation, drainage improves, and nutrients become more available to plants.
Nutrients that were locked away before, I guess.
Yeah, those chemicals, they can kind of bind up those nutrients, making them inaccessible to plants.
Wow, so it's like a temporary fix that leads to a bigger problem.
It can be, yeah, sort of like masking the symptoms without addressing the root cause.
Right. Natural farming is about fixing the root of the problem.
Exactly. It's that long-term strategy for restoration, rebuilding that foundation.
And it's not a quick fix. We've established that.
No, it's a gradual process.
Yeah.
But by consistently putting that organic matter back into the soil through composting, mulching, natural farming, slowly but surely improve soil health and fertility over time.
Okay.
And this means in the long run, you're not so reliant on those external inputs, the expensive chemicals.
So it's more sustainable economically and environmentally.
Exactly, hitting both those crucial aspects.
Makes sense.
And there's a really encouraging example from Andhra Pradesh, the APCNF, the Andhra Pradesh Community Managed Natural Farming.
Okay.
They've implemented this on a pretty large scale, and they've seen real improvements in soil organic carbon in just a few years, 3 to 5.
That's impressive, considering the scale of the problem we're talking about.
It is. It shows that positive change is possible, even in a relatively short time frame.
Okay, so healthier soil, we're ticking that box.
Correct.
Now, water scarcity, that's another massive challenge in India.
Absolutely. Huge issue.
So how does natural farming fit into that picture?
Well, this is another area where natural farming offers some really significant advantages,
Okay, good.
especially given how stressed India's water resources are.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking serious water stress.
Very serious.
Yeah.
But the water-saving techniques built into natural farming, they're quite effective.
Okay, how so?
Well, mulching, for example, by covering the soil, it dramatically reduces evaporation.
Makes sense, like a protective layer.
Exactly. Cover cropping does something similar. It protects that soil surface and helps water seep in better. And then when you have healthy soil, full of microbial life, thanks to natural farming, it actually holds onto water better. It's like a sponge.
Oh, I see. So the soil itself becomes more efficient.
Exactly. It's a whole system working together.
Now, remind me, how bad is India's water situation? Like, paint the picture for us.
It's pretty grim, to be honest.
Yeah.
Our source here, they cite data, including this 2023 report from the Central Groundwater Board, and it shows that India uses a whopping 25% of the world's groundwater.
Wow, that's a huge chunk.
It is, and even more alarming, water levels are considered critical in 256 out of 700 districts.
That's a big red flag.
This goes way beyond just the environment.
Right.
It impacts agricultural productivity, food security, people's livelihoods.
It's interconnected.
It's all connected. So any farming method that can demonstrably reduce water consumption, it's crucial for India's future, for a sustainable future.
Absolutely. It's a must-have, not a nice-to-have.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like natural farming, at least theoretically, ticks that water conservation box.
Yeah, and there's some real-world evidence to support that.
Oh, good. Tell me more.
Well, there's this example of rain-fed farmers in Andhra Pradesh. They've adopted what's called pre-monsoon dry sowing, or PMBS.
Okay.
And it's part of their natural farming practices, and they're saying they need way less irrigation now.
That's huge, especially in a region that depends on rainfall.
It is. It shows that natural farming can empower farmers, even in those water-stressed areas.
It's power, yeah, that's a good word for it.
Giving them more control, more resilience.
Okay, so we've got healthier soil, less water needed, and naturally, this leads to the economics of it all.
Right, the money question.
The money question, exactly. So how does natural farming affect farmers financially, especially those small and marginal farmers who make up the majority in India?
Well, that's where the economic argument for natural farming gets really interesting.
Okay.
Especially when we consider those 86% of Indian farmers who are classified as small or marginal. Those chemical inputs, the fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, they're expensive.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
And for these farmers, it's a real burden.
It's a drain on their resources.
It is, and natural farming addresses this directly by encouraging the use of resources they already have on the farm.
So it's about being resourceful, literally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of buying all these expensive chemicals, they're using those locally made bio inputs like jivan root and bajan root.
Mm-hmm.
And mulching materials, they can often find those right on their land.
Okay, so it's like shifting the investment away from outside sources and back to the farm itself.
Precisely becoming more self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And there's data to back this up.
Oh, good.
The Hindu article mentions zero-budget natural farming, CBNF,
Okay.
a prominent type of natural farming in India.
Right.
And studies have shown that it requires significantly less water, like 50 to 60% less,
Wow.
and less electricity compared to conventional methods,
So lower input costs.
which directly translates to better profits for the farmers.
Okay. That's a big incentive.
It is a real tangible benefit.
All right, so we've talked about soil, water, economic. Let's shift gears now to a global concern that's on everyone's mind. Climate change.
Right, can't ignore that.
Definitely not. So how does natural farming play a role in tackling climate change, both in terms of reducing its impact and adapting to the changes that are already happening?
Well, it's interesting. Natural farming actually addresses both sides of that coin.
Okay, tell me more.
Firstly, it helps mitigate climate change by reducing those greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture.
Okay.
You see, conventional farming, particularly the heavy use of synthetic fertilizers,
Mm-hmm.
they release a lot of nitrous oxide,
Right.
and that's a really potent greenhouse gas.
Yeah, worse than CO2, right?
Way worse, much more potent than carbon dioxide.
Right.
But natural farming, by ditching those synthetic inputs and promoting healthy soil, that's soil full of air.
Aerobic.
Exactly. It significantly minimizes those emissions.
Okay, that makes sense.
It can even potentially reduce methane emissions, which are a big problem with those flooded rice paddies in conventional farming.
So healthier soil, it literally breeds better,
You could say that.
less harmful stuff going into the atmosphere.
Exactly.
And the Hindu article also touched on how natural farming can help farmers adapt to those intensifying climate impacts.
Yes, that's the climate resilience piece, and it's crucial, especially with those extreme weather events becoming more frequent and intense.
Yeah, farmers on the front lines of climate change.
They really are.
It's their livelihoods at stake.
Exactly.
So what are some examples of that resilience in action?
Well, there's this powerful example from Andhra Pradesh during those cyclones, Patai and Titli, back in 2018.
Oh yeah, those were devastating.
They were. But crops grown using natural farming methods, they actually weathered those storms much better.
Really?
Yeah, they were more resilient to the high winds, the heavy rains, compared to conventionally farmed crops in the same areas.
So healthier soil, stronger plants, they can take a punch.
Exactly. They're better equipped to handle those climate shocks.
That's really encouraging.
It is. It shows the potential.
Yeah.
And there's another interesting study, this one from the Indian Agricultural Research Institute in Delhi.
Okay.
They looked at the system of rice intensification, SRI,
Mm-hmm.
which aligns with natural farming principles,
Okay.
and they found that it reduced methane emissions from rice cultivation by a massive 62%.
That's huge, a massive reduction.
It is a really positive finding.
Okay, so natural farming, it's not just about producing enough food. It's also about the quality of that food, right?
Absolutely. Food security is paramount, but the nutritional value of that food is equally important.
Right, we need to be eating well, not just eating.
Exactly. And natural farming inherently promotes greater diversity in our cropping systems.
Okay, how so?
Well, unlike those massive monocultures we often see in conventional agriculture, where it's just one crop as far as the eye can see.
Right, yeah, fields and fields of the same thing.
Exactly. Natural farming encourages things like multi-cropping,
Mm-hmm.
where you're growing multiple crops together.
Okay,
Agroforestry, which integrates trees with crops and livestock,
interesting.
and intercropping, growing different crops close to each other.
So it's like a mixed salad of crops.
You could say that, yeah.
Okay,
And this diversity, it means you're producing a wider variety of food on the same land,
makes sense.
which not only increases the diversity of food locally, but also improves overall nutritional security for everyone.
Right, because people are eating a wider range of nutrients.
Exactly, getting a more balanced diet.
And this ties into those statistics, I think, about how many Indians can't afford a healthy diet.
It does. That's a really crucial point.
And the number who are undernourished.
Yeah, sadly, a significant portion of the population struggles to afford those healthy, nutritious foods.
It's a big concern.
It is, and it highlights the urgent need for agricultural solutions that don't just focus on quantity, but also prioritize the availability of diverse, nutrient-rich foods.
Right, quality over quantity, or maybe both.
Ideally both, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also worth noting that the organic food market in India is projected to grow significantly.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's expected to reach Rs 75,000 crores by 2025.
That's a lot of growth.
It is, and access is increasing too thanks to those e-commerce platforms like Amazon and Big Basket.
Right, so people can actually get their hands on this stuff.
Exactly, it's becoming more mainstream.
So natural farming, it sounds like it could have positive impacts beyond just the farm itself, like on the whole rural economy.
Yeah, that's another key aspect.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, natural farming, it's often more knowledge-intensive and more labor-intensive than conventional agriculture,
Okay.
which means it has the potential to create more jobs in rural areas, strengthen those rural livelihoods.
So more hands on deck.
You could say that, yeah.
Okay.
Things like composting, preparing those bioinputs, weeding manually, managing those diverse cropping systems, they require more people power compared to just spraying chemicals and using big machines.
Right. It's a different approach.
It is, and this is important because, well, farm mechanization, while efficient, it can also displace jobs.
Right. Fewer people needed.
Exactly, and we've seen this trend. The NSSO data shows a decline in casual farm labor since 2011-12.
So natural farming could be a counter to that trend, potentially creating more jobs.
It absolutely could, and there are initiatives already happening, like the National Mission on Natural Farming. They're deploying 30,000 Krishisakis.
Oh, I've heard of them.
They're these agricultural extension workers, many of them women, and they're training other rural women farmers.
So it's empowering women in agriculture.
Exactly. It's creating jobs and fostering that knowledge transfer within communities.
That's really positive.
It is. It's hitting those social and economic goals simultaneously.
Okay, so the potential benefits, they span across those environmental, economic, and social dimensions.
It's a pretty impressive picture.
It is, but as with any big change, especially in agriculture, there are bound to be challenges.
Right. We need to talk about those.
So what are some of the key issues holding back the widespread adoption of natural farming in India?
Well, it's important to have a balanced view here.
Of course.
The long-term potential is definitely there, but there are some hurdles to overcome.
Yeah, real-world hurdle.
Exactly. And I think the first major one is the lack of, well, extensive long-term scientific research and validation, especially across those different agroclimatic zones in India.
So we've got anecdotal evidence, smaller pilot projects, but not enough large-scale data?
That's right. And while those smaller studies often show promising results, we need that rigorous, peer-reviewed research conducted over many years and across different regions to really confirm its effectiveness for large-scale food production.
Okay, so it's about scaling up the evidence base.
Exactly, providing that solid scientific foundation.
Well, without that, I imagine it's hard to convince everyone, right? The scientists, policymakers, even conventional farmers.
It is. There's skepticism, and it's understandable. Without that robust data, it's hard to move natural farming from the sidelines to the mainstream.
It's seen as an alternative, not the go-to.
Exactly.
And there was that finding, right, from the Food and Land Use Coalition, FOU, back in 2023.
Yes, they found that only a tiny fraction of those sustainable agriculture practices in India have actually scaled up significantly.
So there's a big gap between the potential and the reality.
There is, and even the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, ICAR, they've stressed the need for more empirical research in this area.
So everyone's saying we need more data.
It's a common refrain, and it's valid. We need that data to inform policy, to build confidence.
Okay, so data is a big hurdle.
It is, but another major concern that comes up a lot is the impact on yields, especially when farmers first make that switch to natural farming.
Yeah, yields are everything for a farmer, right?
They are. Their livelihood depends on those harvests.
Exactly.
And sometimes natural farming can lead to a dip in yields initially, especially if they're coming from a conventional system that's been relying on those chemical fertilizers and pesticides for years.
So it's like weaning the soil off those chemicals.
You could say that, yeah, it's an adjustment period.
And for a farmer, that's a risk, right? Potentially earning less.
It is. It's a risk-reward calculation.
And that short-term risk of lower yields, it might outweigh the long-term benefits they're told about.
Exactly. Especially for those small and marginal farmers, they might not have the financial cushion to weather that initial dip.
Right, they need that income now.
They do. And conventional farming, despite its long-term issues, it often gives them that predictable higher output in the short term because of those chemical inputs.
So it's a tough choice for them.
It is a real dilemma.
Okay, now let's talk about the consumer side of things. How do we know as consumers that what we're buying is truly naturally farmed?
That's a great question, and it leads us to another issue. The lack of clear, standardized certification for natural farming in India.
So unlike organic farming, which has those established certifications like PGS India and NPOP.
Exactly. Natural farming doesn't have that comparable nationwide system.
So it's hard to tell what's real and what's not.
It is. For consumers, it's confusing. There's no easy way to distinguish genuine natural produce in the market.
And for farmers, they can't really command a premium price for their efforts.
Right, because there's no widely recognized guarantee.
So it undermines trust.
It does, both for consumers and for the market as a whole.
And there are some state-level initiatives, like the one in Himachal Pradesh.
Yes, the Citron F certification model, it's a good step, but it's just one state.
Right, we need something at the national level.
We do, a comprehensive framework that covers the whole country, that builds that confidence both for consumers and for the market.
Okay, so certification is a big missing piece.
It is a crucial piece.
And even if farmers are successfully growing things naturally, is there even a market for them? Can they sell their produce easily and get a fair price?
Well, that's another hurdle. Limited market linkages and value chain development.
So it's not just about growing it, it's about selling it.
Exactly. It's that whole chain, from farm to consumer.
And if that chain is weak, farmers suffer.
They do. They might face challenges accessing those organized markets, getting fair prices.
So they're at a disadvantage compared to conventional farmers.
They can be, yeah.
And there have been issues, right, with those high commissions charged on organic and natural produce.
Yes, and that can drive up prices for consumers, making it less competitive with conventionally grown food.
So it's like a double whammy, hurts the farmers and the consumers.
It can be, yeah. So building those efficient, fair value chains, connecting farmers directly with consumers.
Yeah, cutting out those middlemen.
Exactly, both locally and in those bigger urban markets. That's crucial for natural farming to be economically viable.
Okay, now, we talked earlier about natural farming being more labor-intensive.
Mm.
Does that create its own set of challenges? I mean, is it a barrier to adoption?
It can be, yeah, those higher labor demands, coupled with the fact that there isn't much mechanization available for natural farming yet.
Right. It's still mostly manual.
It is, and they can be a real obstacle, especially in places where there aren't enough workers or where farmers are used to those more mechanized conventional methods.
Right. They're used to the efficiency of machines.
Exactly, but things like weeding by hand, preparing and applying those bio-inputs like compost and G-vermouth, doing all that mulching over large areas.
It's a lot of work.
It is. It's very labor-intensive, and that can mean more work and higher cost for the farmers.
So even though some traditional farming methods were also labor-intensive, the trend now is towards mechanization, towards efficiency.
That's right, and the development of those low-cost, effective machines specifically designed for natural farming, it's still lagging behind.
So for those medium and large-scale farmers, it's not as appealing.
It's not. They're looking at the bottom line.
Right.
And some reports even suggest that labor costs can be way higher, like 7 to 13% higher, with organic farming, which often uses similar techniques to natural farming.
So there's a real economic consideration there.
There is. It's a factor that can't be ignored.
Okay, and finally, are there any, environmental or geographical limitations that might make natural farming less suitable in certain parts of India?
Well, climate and geography definitely play a role.
Okay.
The success of specific natural farming techniques, it really depends on those local conditions, the soil type, the rainfall patterns.
So what works in one place might not work in another?
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. For example, in those really dry regions, farmers might struggle to produce enough biomass for mulching and composting.
Right, because those methods need organic matter.
Exactly. And in very humid areas, they might have more problems with pests and diseases because they're not using those chemical interventions.
So it's about adapting to the local environment.
It is, understanding those nuances.
And there are success stories, right? Like in Himachal Pradesh.
Yes, places like Himachal Pradesh, they've seen good results with natural farming initiatives like the Prakriti Kheti Kushal Kisan Yojana.
Okay.
But then you have those semi-arid regions. They're facing challenges with water scarcity, unreliable rainfall.
So it's a mixed bag.
It is. It highlights the need for location-specific research for tailored approaches.
Right, finding what works where.
Exactly. It's about working with nature, not trying to force it.
Okay, so there are definitely challenges, practical ones, scientific one, but despite all that, are there any bright spots, any success stories, both globally and within India, that we can learn from?
Absolutely, there are some inspiring examples out there.
Okay, good. Tell me more.
Well, looking globally, we can learn a lot from other countries. Agroecology, for instance, it's big in Latin America.
Okay.
It's all about applying ecological principles to farming, integrating traditional knowledge with science, focusing on biodiversity and natural pest control.
So it's a holistic approach.
It is, very much so.
Yeah.
Then you have permaculture. It started in Australia.
Okay.
And it's this whole system for designing land use. It's centered on regeneration, on working with natural ecosystems.
So it's like mimicking nature's patterns.
Exactly. And it's been very successful.
Okay, interesting.
And the system of rice intensification, SRI, it originated in Madagascar and has spread across Asia. It's shown amazing results in terms of using less water and boosting rice yields.
And it uses minimal external inputs, right?
Right. Very little reliance on those external things.
Okay.
And of course, we can't forget about organic and biodynamic farming, which are more common in Europe and other parts of the world.
Right. Those have been around for a while.